What's going on, everybody? Kalipus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you 5 5G phones you can get in 2022 for less than $500. In this price point, while most of these phones are not quite at the level of a normal flagship phone, you're still going to get real good performance and a ton of different features, all while still being reasonably affordable. Now, for the latest up-to-date pricing, I will be linking to all of these phones in the video description because this is always changing, so definitely check that out. And of course, if you want to learn more about any of these phones individually, be sure to check out my full reviews of them on the channel. But with all that being said, let's get started. So up first, we got the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022. Having been released in May of 2022, this is probably the newest out of all of these. With this phone, we're getting a 6.8-inch 120Hz IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 395, an aspect ratio of 20.5:9, and a screen to body ratio of about 85.8%. So we definitely got a real good display here. With an aspect ratio of 20.5:9, we're getting a taller and more narrow form factor here, and that's going to be great for content consumption. If you're doing anything in landscape mode, you're going to get a more immersive experience, and if you're doing something like reading, you can fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. In addition to this, of course, the resolution is great. You're going to get a nice, sharp, crisp image, and the colors are nice and bold as well. So if you want a phone with a large, really high quality display, this phone is going to be a great choice. For storage with this phone, we're getting 256GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so some of the best storage you can get. In fact, for a mid-range phone, it's the best storage you can get. So whether you're a power user, average user, no matter what you're doing with your phone, you're really not going to go wrong with this. For security features, we got a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key, and this phone also has face unlock, so we're getting 2 different options to unlock it. The fingerprint scanner is real fast and responsive, no issues here whatsoever, real convenient to use, so I really have no complaints. For the camera setup, we got a hole punch design for the front facing camera, and this camera is 16 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera that also doubles as a macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, as far as features go, this phone has pretty much everything. So if you're taking lots of photos and you want a wider variety of features, then this phone is a great choice. And as far as the quality goes, the photos it takes are really good as well. Internally, with the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022, we're getting 8GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 695 5G processor. Now, I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone, and it came back with a single core score of 672 and a multi-core score of 1917. Now, I would personally recommend running this test on your current phone and then comparing your scores to all of these, because that's really the only way you're going to see which phone is going to be an upgrade for you and which one won't. But that being said, just based on this test at least, this phone is actually the second fastest out of all of these. So if you really do want a lot of processing power, definitely keep this in mind, because this phone is going to be able to handle pretty much anything you throw at it. Sure, it's not quite flagship level, but for a mid-range device like this, it does handle even the more demanding tasks pretty well. So if you're on your phone a lot and you're doing stuff like social media, web browsing, streaming content like videos and music, and maybe a little bit of mobile gaming, then the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022 is going to be a great choice. Now, this phone has a 5000 mAh battery that supports 15-watt fast charging, so definitely not bad. We're getting pretty much the largest battery you can get in a smartphone, at least in the US, and the 15-watt fast charging doesn't hurt either. This phone also has NFC, so if you want to use mobile contactless payment services and do any of that tap and pay stuff, then you'll be happy to know that for the first time in a Moto G phone, you actually can do this. Coming up next, we got the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2021. Now, if the name didn't give it away, this phone is actually the predecessor of the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022. And despite being over a year old now, this phone is actually still a really good device even by today's standards. With this phone, we're getting a 6.8-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 386, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and an 85% screen to body ratio. So this phone has pretty much the same display as the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022. Sure, it's not quite as tall and narrow, and it doesn't have a 120Hz refresh rate either, but we're still getting a really large 6.8-inch display and a 1080p resolution, so it's not half bad. For storage, this phone is getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, but keep in mind, this is the Cricket variant, and if you get it unlocked through Motorola, you are going to have 256GB instead. But either way, this phone has plenty of storage, so whether you're a power user or just an average user, you're really not going to go wrong with this phone. For security features, this phone has both a fingerprint scanner and face unlock, with the fingerprint scanner being right back here in a more classic spot. And it's also real fast and responsive, so as you can see here. There we go. And again, this phone does have face unlock as well, so we get two options to unlock it. For the camera setup, we got another hole punch for the front-facing camera. This camera is 16 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 48 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra-wide camera, a 5 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So feature-wise, just like the successor, this phone has pretty much everything. So again, if you're taking lots of photos and you want a bunch of different features, then the Moto G Stylus 5G 2021 really won't disappoint. Internally with this phone, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 480 5G processor. Keep in mind the 4GB of RAM is really just a Cricket thing. If you get this phone unlocked, you will get 6GB of RAM. But that being said, I did run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone, and it came back with a single core score of 504 and a multi-core score of 1660. So while it's not quite as fast as the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022, it still is decently fast. And if you're just using your phone for more normal activities, like browsing the web, going on social media, streaming videos and music, and a little mobile gaming here and there, this phone is going to be perfectly fine. For the battery, we got another 5000 mAh battery that supports 10 watt fast charging, so the fast charging itself isn't really that impressive, but the battery at 5000 mAh is again pretty much the largest battery you can get in the US for a smartphone, so you're gonna get tons of life throughout the day, depending on how you actually use your phone, maybe even multiple days worth, and then down the road as the battery degrades, since you're already starting out with more battery life than you really need, it's not really gonna affect you nearly as quickly as it would with a smaller battery. Now unfortunately, this phone does not have NFC, so if you want to use contactless mobile payment services, then you won't be able to do that with this phone. But in general, despite being a little old compared to the rest, the Moto G Stylus 5G 2021, especially at what you can get it for these days, is definitely a good option that provides a lot of value for the money. And next up, we got the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G. Now this phone is the predecessor to one of the most popular phones on my channel, the Samsung Galaxy A32 5G, and as you can see in my full review of this phone, it's definitely a solid upgrade. So with the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G, we're getting a 6.4-inch 90Hz Super AMOLED display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 411, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and an 83.7% screen to body ratio. So this display is not quite as large as the last two, but it more than makes up for it with great quality. The Super AMOLED display here is going to give us great looking colors, and the brightness and viewing angles are much better than the last two. And with the 90Hz refresh rate, the movement on the screen is going to be a little bit faster and smoother than the standard 60Hz display. So when you're doing anything that involves motion, whether you're watching a video, playing a game, or even just using the phone in general, everything is going to look and feel a little bit smoother, and the phone is going to feel more premium overall. For storage, this phone is getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, but keep in mind there's another variant that has 256, so it really depends on which one you get. But that being said, whether it's 128 or 256, you're really not going to go wrong unless you're really a power user, in which case get the one with more storage. But if you're just an average user, even 128GB of internal storage is going to be perfectly fine, especially with the microSD card expansion. Now with this phone, just like the last two, we're getting a fingerprint scanner and face unlock, so we get two options to get into it. And with this phone, the fingerprint scanner is right here on the display, definitely looks real modern and premium. And it works really well too. Let's try that one more time. And there we go, so real fast and responsive. Now for the camera setup, we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera. This camera is 13 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 48 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera, and a 5 megapixel macro camera. So just like all the others, pretty much every feature available. And when it comes to quality, the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G can take some of the best photos here. And in addition to this, for video, you can record video in 4K in both the rear and front cameras. So if you want to take some higher quality videos with this phone, you definitely can. Now internally, with the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G, with this variant at least, we're getting 6GB of RAM, but keep in mind, there are other variants that have 4GB and 8GB. But that being said, the processor we're getting here is the Samsung Exynos 1280 processor. I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone, and it came back with a single core score of 740 and a multi-core score of 1874. So definitely on the faster side here. And again, with this kind of processing power, while it's not quite flagship level, you can still do pretty much anything with it. So whether you're browsing the web, going on social media, consuming content, or playing games, you're not really going to have too much trouble with anything. For the battery, we're getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 25 watt fast charging. So not only does this phone have the same large battery as the others, but we're also getting really strong fast charging. So if you're on the go a lot and you don't always have a whole lot of time to charge up your phone, this is definitely a nice benefit. In addition to this, the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G does have NFC as well. So with this phone, if you want to make mobile contactless payments, you definitely can. Up next, we got the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G. Now this phone, as you might expect, is actually pretty similar to the A33 5G, but it is a little bit nicer and more premium. With this phone, we're getting a 6.5-inch 120Hz Super AMOLED display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 405, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and a screen-to-body ratio of about 85.4%. So with this phone, it's a tiny bit larger than the A33 5G, and it has the same great quality. The Super AMOLED display makes the colors look real good, and in addition to that, we got an even higher refresh rate here, so things are going to be even more smooth and feel a little bit more premium as well. For storage, this phone has 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion. Definitely not bad there, although as always, there is another variant out there with 256, so keep that in mind. For the camera setup, we got a hole punch design for the front-facing camera. This camera is 32 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 64 megapixel main camera, a 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera, a 5 megapixel macro camera, and a 5 megapixel depth sensing camera. So just like every other phone here, this phone has pretty much all the features. And in addition to this phone can also record 4K videos in both the rear and front cameras, just like the A33 5G, but I would say the quality is a little bit better on this phone. Internally, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G is getting 6GB of RAM with the Samsung Exynos 1280 processor. So that's right, it has the exact same processor as the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G. I'm not quite sure why they did that, but it's a great processor, so I'm not really complaining. I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone, and it came back with a single core score of 742 and a multi-core score of 1910. So basically in the same ballpark as the A33 5G, which is not surprising considering it's the same processor. And again, this is going to be enough to handle pretty much any normal activity you throw at it, some better than others. So if you're doing something like playing Fortnite, it might not run quite as well as if you're playing Angry Birds, but other than that, if you're doing more normal activities like browsing the web, going on social media, consuming any kind of content in most mobile gaming, while not being quite flagship level, this phone can handle it perfectly fine. For the battery, this phone has a 5000 mAh battery that supports 25 watt fast charging. So same thing as the A33 5G, really large battery, great fast charging. So if battery is one of your top priorities, you're really not going to go wrong with either of these phones. In addition to this, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G does have NFC as well, so you can make mobile contactless payments with this phone no problem. And last but definitely not least, we got my personal favorite, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE. Now a little disclaimer here, this phone does not retail for under $500. In fact, brand new, it goes for around $700-800, but I still wanted to include it because you can easily find one of these under $500, whether you're getting it used or through a carrier deal. But that being said, out of all of these, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is not only the most expensive, but also has some of the best features. So with this phone, we're getting a 6.4-inch 120Hz dynamic AMOLED display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 411, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and a screen-to-body ratio of about 85.3%. So this phone has a really similar display to the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G with an AMOLED and a super high refresh rate, but the dynamic AMOLED display does look a little bit better, and as you can see here, the image is great, so if you're consuming any kind of content, you're going to get a real good experience here. In addition to this, it also does feel really premium when you're using it. The motion on the screen is a lot smoother and faster thanks to having a higher refresh rate. So if you're doing anything with motion on the screen, whether you're streaming videos, playing games, or just navigating through your phone, you're going to get a great experience. For storage, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is getting 128GB of internal storage. There's also a variant with 256, just like pretty much all of these phones. But keep in mind, with this phone, there's no microSD card expansion, so that is one drawback here. So if you have lots of photos and videos and stuff like that, you might want to keep this in mind, because in that case, all of these phones are going to have an advantage over this one. But that being said, one feature this phone has that none of these other phones do is wireless charging. And while wireless charging isn't a game changer per se, if you have it, it's definitely a nice feature to use. It does have its benefits. For example, if you spend a lot of time at a desk, you might want to use a wireless charger instead of a normal charger just for cable management, or if the charging port breaks. On any of these other phones, you'd either have to repair it, which is probably more than the phone is worth, or just replace the whole phone. But with this phone, if the charging port happens to break, you can just use the wireless charger and keep it a little longer without having to replace it. So no matter how you look at it, wireless charging is definitely a nice feature to have. For security, this phone has pretty much the exact same setup as the other two Samsungs, with a fingerprint scanner on the display that works really well, super fast and responsive. Try that one more time. And of course, this phone also has Face Unlock. For the camera setup, we got a water drop notch for the front-facing camera. This camera is 32 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 12 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel telephoto lens, and a 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera. Now, a couple things about this camera setup. First of all, with a significantly lower megapixel camera than all these others, it might seem at first that the camera is weaker, but that's definitely not the case, because with higher end phones like this, they tend to have much better sensors, so the megapixel count doesn't really matter as much. In addition to this, even though this phone doesn't have a macro camera, you can kind of use the telephoto lens as a macro camera in some situations. Now, of course, compared to something like the Samsung Galaxy A33 and A53 5G, where the macro cameras are really high quality, the details might not be quite as fine and vivid with the telephoto lens, but unless you're taking macro-like photos all the time, it's not really gonna matter. And in addition to this, the ultra-wide camera on this phone is much better than any of these, and the telephoto lens allows you to zoom in quite a bit more without losing quality. For video, this phone can record in 4K at 60 frames per second in both the rear and front cameras. So really, for anything related to the camera or videos, when it comes to quality, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is significantly better than any of these other phones here. So if you want to take more professional looking photos and record really high quality videos, then this phone is absolutely going to be the way to go. Internally, with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 888 5G processor. Keep in mind, there's another variant out there that has 8GB of RAM, but this specific phone in my hand only has 6GB. Now, I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone, and it came back with a single core score of 1081 and a multi-core score of 3227. So as you can see, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is significantly more powerful than all these other phones. Based on this test at least, it actually has pretty much double the processing power of the Moto G Stylus 5G 2021 and significantly more than all the others as well. So if you really want the highest performance you can get, then by far the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is going to be the way to go. While these other phones are more mid-range phones, they get really good performance for what they are, but still aren't quite flagship level. The Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is really the real thing. This is technically a flagship phone. So of course, if you want flagship performance, out of all of these, this is going to be the best option for you. For the battery, this phone isn't quite as good. With a 4500 mAh battery that supports 25 watt fast charging. Now that's not bad per se, but first of all, a 4500 mAh battery, while not being small, is still not going to have as much life as a 5000 mAh battery to begin with. And in addition to this, with a really powerful processor and a dynamic AMOLED display and a high refresh rate to go along with that, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is going to be consuming a lot more power than these other ones as well. So in general, if battery life is a priority for you, then this might not be the best choice for you, because the battery life, while not being bad by any means, is not going to be nearly as good as the other phones in this video. Now this phone, unsurprisingly, does have NFC, so if you want to make contactless mobile payments, you won't have to worry about that either. But in general, I do think out of all these phones, this is definitely the highest end, best performance one. But again, keep in mind, this is the one phone that doesn't retail for under $500, so if you do want to get it for that price, you're either going to have to get it used or get a deal through a carrier. But these were my 5 favorite 5G phones you can get in 2022 for less than $500. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you found this information useful as well. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to learn more about any of these phones individually, be sure to watch my other videos for each of them on the channel, because I do have a lot of them. And again, for the latest up-to-date pricing, be sure to check out the links in the video description, because this is always changing. But that's it for this video. As always, I will see you in the next one.